Patrick Swayze in some pickup trucks. Well, really, in the time of the first century, this wasn't some theory or some story or some movie. This is what the Jewish people and therefore the Christians of that time faced as they were ruled over by the Roman government. A government which by and large was not sympathetic to the cause of Christ. So let's look at this story that this phrase, this verse, seek and save the lost, comes from Luke chapter 19. If you would, open up your Bibles there. And let's look at this story and see what we might learn today about how to share Christ, how to seek and save the lost in today's culture, in today's environment, which surely faces no greater challenges than those faced during the time of the first century. Luke chapter 19 says this: Jesus entered into Jericho and was passing through, and a man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. In fact, it says that not only was he a chief tax collector, but it could be translated as he was a ruler amongst the tax collectors. He was wealthy, and everyone at this time would have known how he had gotten that wealth, and that was surely through illicit means, because tax collectors were part of the corrupt Roman government system of taxation, where it was basically licensed theft, in which the tax collectors could just take whatever it is that they wanted. Kind of sounds familiar to today, doesn't it? Well, if you look in that time, you see that the tax collectors were some of the most hated people around. I don't know if you've seen the show The Chosen about the life of Jesus, but it's interesting how they portray Matthew, who is the tax collector, and as he goes around and lives his life, collects taxes, he has a Roman guard that goes with him so that he wouldn't be killed because he was so hated. And this was very common in this time, this view of tax collectors. So in the first century, if you were to hear this story, where it starts out that Jesus entered into Jericho and he encounters with this man who was a chief tax collector, if you were reading this story out loud in the first century, immediately people would start booing and hissing. Boo, hiss, tax collector, bad guy, bad character. But the story will actually go in a most surprising direction, because it says in verse 3 that this Zacchaeus, this chief tax collector, this ruler amongst the tax collectors, he wanted to do what? He wanted to see Jesus. He wanted to see Jesus, but being a man, he could not because of the crowd. Maybe Zacchaeus had heard these parables that Jesus told about the kingdom of God and how tax collectors and prostitutes were entering into this kingdom. Maybe he got hope that his life could be different. Maybe he was just curious, but we see that he is interested, and he is in fact seeking Jesus. It's interesting, when we start seeking the lost, oftentimes God will start sending us people who are also seeking. It's kind of how it works. Why would God send someone our way if we're not seeking, if we're not looking? And here we see that Zacchaeus is actually looking. He wants to see Jesus. And so it says in verse 4 that he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. Now, this happened in Jericho, and I've actually been to Jericho. And there in Jericho, there is a fig tree that has a fence around it. And this was the very exact tree that Zacchaeus climbed up. Well, at least that's what they say. But you can see that tree there, and it's a nice tree. You can see that someone can get up in that. But Zacchaeus, he goes and he runs ahead of the crowd, apparently. He runs ahead so that he can climb this tree and he can see Jesus. Now, know if we quite grasp how absurd this must have sounded to the people of the first century when they heard this story or saw it played out in front of their eyes. Because Zacchaeus, as a ruler amongst the tax collectors, as someone high up in the Roman government, he was a very important person. And to see someone who is rich and powerful and very important really actually run ahead and climb up into a tree so he could see Jesus, this is a rather absurd type of occurrence in the first century. You would not imagine this. You know people who are rich and powerful today, I'm sure. Just imagine someone like Jeff Bezos of Amazon, or Bill Gates, or LeBron James. Well, maybe not LeBron, he's tall. Zacchaeus was short. But doing something like this. I mentioned recently about Belarus. It's a former communist country. And I actually was telling this story there, and they know something about rulers in the government and people who are very powerful. And actually, the president of Belarus passed a law or passed an edict that no one in the country could call themselves president. Not just of the country. They couldn't call themselves president of a company or a school board or even, I guess, of their own home. I mean, talk about insecure. What do you mean you're president? There's only one El Presidente. Well, this was one of those rulers, part of this government system, very important people, and this is who climbs up into this tree so that he can see Jesus. Now, how would Jesus respond? Well, in verse 5, it says, when Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. Now, it's interesting that it notes that Jesus actually sees Zacchaeus, right? He sees him. And he takes the time to stop and talk to him. Now, what was Jesus on his way to do? He was on his way to go to the cross to die for us. Kind of an important job, right? Kind of a busy mission. But he decided that this was important enough to stop what he was doing, to take note of the person in front of him who climbed up in a tree to see him. You know, one of the biggest challenges that we have in sharing our faith and reaching people today, one, we're not seeking, we're not looking, and two, we don't take the time to notice the people that are right in front of us. I don't know about you, but sometimes I catch my going through, like, let's say a drive-through, and someone is serving, and I'm busy, I'm checking my phone or whatever, and I will pay and get my food and everything without even looking up and seeing that person. And sometimes I think that just must be dehumanizing to people to not even have people notice them. How many people are right around us, in our orbit, in our circle, our places of work, our family, our neighbors, that if we just opened our eyes and took a moment and took the time to talk to them, God might send someone our way who is open and receptive and also seeking. You know, as busy as Jesus was, as important as he was, as great as his mission was, he wasn't too busy for people. And I don't know you, but, you know, church leaders and ministry leaders and busy members and everything, we can be so busy with all that we forget that it's really about God and people. And Jesus is always making time for people. For children, for women, and sometimes the most surprising people. People outside of the normal orbit. Prostitutes, tax collectors, widows, foreigners. Not exactly the type of people that if you were, like, let's say, going to plant a church, you would have first in mind. This is who we're going to build this church around, right? But this is what Jesus did. He took notice of those around him, and he took every opportunity to show them love, grace, and kindness, and seek to draw them closer to God. And sometimes the people who are the most receptive are the most surprising people. When I was in high school, we lived in Oklahoma. My family had moved to Oklahoma. My dad was teaching at Oklahoma Christian, allowed us to go on mission trips during the summer. We also met some interesting people there. One was a guy named Bobby Mercer. I don't know if y'all know who Bobby Mercer was. He was a New York Yankee All-Star. In fact, a 5-time All-Star and a Gold Glove winner. And he was one who actually hit 4 home runs once at consecutive at-bats. He was a Christian and a good person. In fact, he went to one of the churches there in Oklahoma City that we were at. And there's a story that is told about how there was a sick kid once who was terminally ill, and he was asked to hit a home run, and he actually hit 2 home runs to fulfill this dying boy's last wish. Well, Bobby Mercer was one who was a pretty well-known person, an all-star celebrity. It was interesting just to talk with him. And he also ran in a lot of circles. In fact, because he was a New York Yankee, he got to meet a lot of New York celebrities, including Billy Joel, who is one of my idols. So I love Billy Joel. I grew up playing and singing Piano Man and all these different ones. Well, he actually knew Billy Joel. And he knew I was a big fan, and played in a church, talent show and everything. And so he knew I loved Billy Joel. And he said, actually, Billy Joel is going to be coming to town. And when he does, he'll probably come and visit me. And if he does come, I will invite you over. Just like, what? Really? And that's exactly what happened. He came to town. He was there. I got to come over. And we jammed and played Piano Man. And all of that is true, except for the fact that his trip was canceled. He didn't actually come. But I could just imagine what that would have been like. That would have been awesome. Well, Zacchaeus was someone that you would never guess would be open to God. You would never guess that he was searching and wanted to see Jesus. But in fact, he was. And Jesus took the time to notice him. Luke chapter 19, it says that Zacchaeus, when he heard this from Jesus, he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. And so this is a pretty cool story. A pretty amazing story, especially for Zacchaeus. For anyone outside of God, every sinful person, for everyone who has felt hurt and marginalized, judged, not worth anything, it shows that God accepts all people. This was good news. It is a pretty amazing story. But notice how the people respond. Verse 7, it says, all the people saw this, and rather than being excited, look, this guy has come to faith, he's come to believe in Jesus, or is seeking out Jesus, and Jesus is going to him. It says that all the people began to mutter and say about Jesus, they're muttering about Jesus, he has gone to be the guest of a sinner. They're not celebrating, they're muttering. And the irony, of course, is that those who are muttering about him going to the home of a sinner, what are they? They are sinners. But they're muttering about Jesus going to the home of a sinner. Well, yeah, I'm a sinner, but I'm not like you, right? I'm not like you, like you're a sinner. Think about it today. Who is it that we are willing to reach out to go into their home and to share a meal with? That's still a pretty big deal, right? What about the home of a tax collector? Maybe an IRS agent? Maybe we have some here. Maybe that doesn't have the same stigma for us today. But are there others that maybe could cause people to mutter? Maybe even the home of the house of someone who's of a different political party, someone from a different faith or religion, someone who's outside the church, maybe someone who's not living a good moral life. There are probably some people that we are more comfortable being around and being in proximity to than others. But notice what Zacchaeus says when they begin to mutter. He hears the muttering, apparently. And he stood up and he said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." He says that he will give back 4 times the amount of what he has cheated anyone out of, and he will give away half his possessions to the poor. Now, if you can just imagine it's one of these famous figures in government, in business, wherever it may be, and they say, "I'm giving away half my wealth to those who are poor. And if I've ripped any of you off, you get 4 times the amount back." Now, why would he do this, and why would he say this? And why the 4 times the amount? Well, you know that in the Old Testament law, if you ripped someone off, if you stole something, you had to pay it back, you know, at what amount? 4 times the amount. So Zacchaeus is saying that I am going to follow the Old Testament law. I am going to do as God has commanded, and I'm going to prove it by my actions. And if I cheated anyone, because that's the criticism, right? This guy's on the side of the other government. He's a cheat. He's stolen. He's gotten his wealth in illicit ways. He says, "Look, I'm changing. And I will now start following God and the law." Now, let me ask you this. So he's going to do this moral thing. He's going to do the right thing. He is going to give back. He's not going to cheat anymore. He's going to pay back what he has stolen from other people. When does he decide to do this? Was it before or after he encountered Christ? It was after he encountered Jesus. Do you think Zacchaeus would have had this changed life before this encounter with Christ? He started following the law after he had this incredible encounter where Jesus took notice of him, where Jesus welcomed him, where Jesus, in fact, said, "I will go and I will eat dinner at your home." And then Zacchaeus decided to change his heart and his life. If we are talking about reaching out to people today, we need to know that we need to lead first, not with moral issues first, but with Christ first. Because it is Christ who has the power and the ability to change people's lives. I remember when we were living down in Texas, and we had moved in, and one of our new neighbors came over and started talking to us, and she was friendly, but I'll also say she had a bit of colorful language. Now, I could have, in that first meeting, really gotten on to her. But I decided, you know what? I'm going to get to know her, and I'm going to wait a little bit, and maybe that's not the most important issue in her life. Well, do you know that over the next few years, was able to spend time with her, spend time with her family, actually baptize her daughter into Christ? And I imagine if the first words out of my mouth had been something that was criticizing, condemning, probably would have shut that door. It's interesting, the first words out of Jesus' mouth, he didn't say, Zacchaeus, you know what? You're a cheat, and you're a liar, and you're a scumbag. He said, Zacchaeus, what? I'm coming to your house today. Now let me ask you, which of these approaches is more likely to be well received? Which of these approaches is going to be more effective at reaching people for Christ today? Jesus, I would contend, is the greatest of angels that ever lived. And if we want to know how to reach people for Christ today, we've got to follow his example. And Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house because this man too is a son of Abraham. What does he mean by that? He's saying that just like Abraham, who placed faith in God and therefore became part of God's kingdom, this man is also placing faith in God and in Christ. And so in that sense, he is a son of Abraham. He is one of God's children. And then Jesus says, for the Son of Man, what? Came to seek and save the lost. And we've got to first that lost person is who? That's you and that's me. And when we realize that, then we can have the grace to reach out to others, take them where they are. If we're going to reach people for Christ, we have to have open hearts to everyone around us, open eyes to see those that God has placed in our path, and open homes where we invite others in and we are open to being with others who invite us in to their lives as well. I'd like to share with you now a short story video about seeking the lost, part of our film series from Iceland, the story of redemption, a touching story of a child who is lost and the extent that a father would go to reach him and save him. Iceland is a country with vast uninhabited lands. Its mountains are intimidating, rising up out of the ground. Its deserts can seem endless. It is a struggle just to survive. We are here in southern Iceland at Vestrahorn, also known as Batman Mountain. Years ago, a DC plane crashed in southern Iceland near Vik. Everyone in that plane wreck survived and were soon picked up by rescuers. But the plane site has become a tourist attraction alongside all the natural wonders of Iceland. But the plane wreck is a haunting and lonely sight out in the desert, surrounded by nothing. In the 1960s, there was a movie made called Lost in the Desert, which was based on a true story. And it was the story of a young 8-year-old boy named Durkee, who was flying across the desert with his uncle, who was a pilot. And his uncle had a heart attack, and the plane crash landed. And when the plane crashed, his uncle died. But the boy and his little dog who was with him somehow survived, but they were lost and alone. If you can just imagine a young child lost and alone in the desert. I am a father with 3 daughters, and I can't imagine any of them, let alone my youngest, out wandering alone with no food, no water, no compass, no cell phone, none of these things. And this boy wandered around, and hyenas came and surrounded him. And the boy, in seeking to get the hyenas to go away, lit a fire, which was a pretty brave and insightful thing for a young child to do. But in so doing, he inadvertently blew up the plane and destroyed the transmitter. The helicopters going to look for the child were looking for a red and white plane, but now it was a black plane. And so the helicopters never found the child. They never showed up. There were some tribesmen, some bushmen, who took him in. But the child was stung by a scorpion, and when he woke up, he was delirious. And he somehow thought that the tribesmen were cooking and were going to eat his dog. And so the child went crazy. And the bushmen got so frustrated with him that they left him behind. They abandoned him. And so he was left alone once again in the desert. Meanwhile, his father back at home has been mobilizing rescue efforts. And he tried everything. He mobilized the army, the newspapers, desperately seeking out ways to find his son. He printed out 2 million flyers and had them dropped over the desert with instructions to his son, telling him, look here, this is how you survive in the desert, point by point. And he said to him, don't think that I will ever give up looking for you. I will never stop searching for you. I will find you. But none of these efforts worked. So finally, the father decided to go to that desert himself. He mortgaged his home. He sacrificed everything to go to the desert to search for his son. And he looked for him everywhere, searching high and low across the endless desert. And when he finally finds him, he is dehydrated, unconscious, lying there in the desert. And he has his little dog with him, his faithful little dog. And he scoops him up in his arms, and he fires a shot on the rifle to let the search team know that his son, who was lost, is now found. Such is the joy of a father who finds a lost child. Jesus said he came to seek and save the lost. And for all of us who have received this hope and salvation, may we share Christ with others and join in God's great rescue mission for the entire world. In the stories of the prodigal son, the lost sheep, the lost coin, we see that God cares about those who are far away from him. And if we want to be like Christ, we must care for them as well. So how can we do this today? Well, we can start praying and looking for opportunities. That's what we'll be doing at the potluck. Afterwards, we'll have some time to pray for people on our hearts, family, friends, loved ones, neighbors, etc. And we need to make that intentional. And so appreciative of Bill's great prayer that he had for us this morning. We need to be intentional on getting proximity to people, physically or virtually, and get to know people who are outside of our immediate circle so that we can share Christ with them. We need to understand and get to know seekers in their world and understand the type of things that will resonate and to touch people's hearts today. And finally, we need to be gracious, hospitable, and inviting. We ought to be the most loving people, the most winsome people that there is, sharing people God's love, his grace, and the hope that we have in him. May that be our mission, and may we indeed seek and save the lost. Thank you for your love, your support, your interest in the gospel, your faithfulness in this mission. If you have any need, then please come as together we stand and sing.